Anyway, I'm so glad that you joined me here. And for the audience to know a little bit about Tony, Tony was of course, most of the people in the bodybuilding and fitness industry know about Tony, but some of my listeners are more into longevity. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction. Tony is a former lawyer. I think he specialized in bankruptcy law, living originally in Sacramento, Northern California. And Tony changed his life around quite a bit and became an avid participant in the bodybuilding lifestyle and someone who is sort of a PED aficionado. In addition to that, I think personally that he is the closest thing we have in the bodybuilding world to a civil rights leader. And he has suffered a lot actually for trying to promote our rights to use PEDs, which is something maybe we'll get into a little bit here, but he usually talks about that. So I wanted to begin with I wanted to know more about Tony's early life. So before I do that, also, I want to thank you for joining me. I want our listeners to know this is a new podcast. This is the 5th episode. My channel on YouTube is new. And Tony is just so gracious and generous with his time. So I really appreciate it, Tony.
All right. Thanks for having me, Leo. Anything I can do to get my message out so that hopefully other people embrace a higher quality of life and the chemistry and access to the chemistry to do it.
Absolutely. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is about your own life. Is it that you grew up in Sacramento, or were you just based there later when you were a lawyer?
I had divorced parents, so I grew up in Sacramento between two different households, one in the city and one in the suburbs, and then spent a little bit of time in Southern California, 2nd and 3rd grade, and then my senior year of high school was in Mexico.
Oh, wow. You lived all over the place. Well, this got along to some of the questions I was going to ask, which is, okay, so you grew up from early childhood in a separated parental situation?
Yeah, so my mom's side of the family was Italian, very family-oriented, where my dad's side of the family was very conservative, Republican, by the book, political, and very business oriented.
Fascinating. This explains a lot. So going back to a brief thing, I've heard you mention in other interviews that you grew up in I guess lower school as being sort of nerdy and maybe not fitting in so much. Did you have sort of a trauma that began in childhood that influenced you to become introspective or introverted in school? Or was it sort of just a natural not fitting in, or maybe being more cerebral?
I was always smarter than the people around me, but not that to an extreme. It was more productive to an extreme. So I was obsessed with productivity at a young age. Like, even if I'm playing with G.I. Joes, to me, I'm actually building something that matters. And I think that was instilled into me by my father's side, who was really obsessed with time management and productivity and being on this planet to do something and not wasting any time on pleasure that isn't also building something greater than yourself. So I was constantly reinforced with that value system at a really young age, but it set me apart from everybody else because most of the other kids are destructive and they're into what pleases them in the moment. And so I was an outcast, a nerd. But not the nerd in the traditional sense, like, the glass. Oh, actually I was. Okay. I did for a period of time where I wore glasses. I had the braces thing. I had the acne thing. I wore my shorts up to here because my grandmother would dress me actually because she was wearing back. But my shorts were up to here, shirt tucked in with a polo shirt, while everybody else is wearing, I remember Lucie and Billabong were what was cool. Billabong was cool back then. Yeah. And my socks came up to here. So I actually was the typical, I guess, from the outside looking in, I was a typical nerd, yeah.
I was also dressed funny like that as well. So you're saying you grew up with a sort of the Puritan work ethic, which is sort of the work ethic that built the United States, the can-do attitude, the sacrificing the momentary pleasure for the long-term goal. And we'll get back to that when we talk more about your philosophy. The last question about your childhood, I just wanted to know, did you see an inspiration for your later interest in, which it's hard to describe, but it's an interest in bettering yourself in any way you can, and particularly going past your natural biological constraints? do you see a root in your childhood for that, or how do you describe it?
Well, my dad was obsessed with self-help seminars, business seminars, constant education, even though he already reached a high level of success by the time I was being able to analyze what he's doing. He was constantly learning. So I'm in the car with him listening to self-help audio tapes like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus when it first comes out. I don't know, when I'm probably like 6, 7, 8, 9 years old or something like that. And so all the audiobooks on tape, he was obsessed with that. He was going to seminars. He'd always have a notepad. He'd always be learning and taking notes. So I just thought that was the way to live. I thought that was actually more normal. I didn't realize that people just normally progress up to a certain point, maybe right when they get out of college, you get the first job and just kind of stay stagnant the rest of their life. I just can't even relate to that. To me, it's like if you didn't learn something or develop something in yourself, and then of course, you can take that so far with knowledge and learning, and then you want to start improving yourself in other ways. So then there's the physical realm and the way to improve your body with chemistry, and it just keeps going from there. But I think the seed was planted in watching my dad's obsession with self-improvement and constant personal development.
And certainly, coming from an academic perspective, sometimes the academics think of self-help books as wishy-washy and not very valuable. But my personal experience, I found that they change something about a person's soul and his perspective and give you that kind of... And an interesting thing about you is that I always notice that you have an almost like a politician's ability to look at another person's perspective as you speak to them. And it's a sort of charisma that actually we don't have anywhere else in the bodybuilding world. It's something that I think people can learn from. I don't know if it's something people are born with. There's a psychological theory that this comes from early childhood trauma in which you had to quickly judge the facial expressions of someone that was very important to you. But anyway, it's very interesting. And
one of the psychological concepts that shape the way that I speak, because when I'm speaking, I'm thinking about you and how you're perceiving my message. And then I'm also trying to generalize it across a broad demographic that may be listening. Of course, if I'm one-on-one with just one person, I can convey my message in a way that exactly what's in my head is exactly what will show up in their head. And that's something that people have a hard time doing because they can't see someone else's perspective and ability to interpret that information and how you have to code that information so that they, from their perspective, can get the same message inside their head. And the first diagram I saw, and maybe it was in elementary school, was a guy with a guy's head here, a guy's head here, and communicating in a bubble on each side. And the bubble shows what's inside their head, and the message isn't necessarily what's in their head. So you have to change the message to create the actual thought in the other person's head, not just communicating the words like a robot, because us humans are going to interpret that with their own emotion and perspective.
And the interesting thing is that what I wanted to ask you, have you noticed in your years of using PEDs that or not only PEDs, but psychoactive substances, that your ability to empathize in this manner has changed a little bit? Has it worsened?
Massively. Marijuana, actually.
Yes.
I'll just give you one example. Like, my Thai girlfriend barely speaks English. She's saying English, but she's not really understanding what she's saying. She's not understanding what I'm saying. But when I'm high, I can look past the words. I can actually understand the emotion behind the words and the message she's trying to convey. I can see it from her perspective. And it's like that with anybody. And that's why what I like about marijuana is, and I'm not like a stoner that smokes all the time, but I appreciate the perspective shift when it happens, is you can get people together who normally think they're communicating because they're talking, but they're not really understanding what each other is thinking and feeling and seeing. And you can share that perspective and experience with each other. And that's actually what I like about the drug, not the being high part. And this goes back to something you said as far as like using self-help and whether it's foo-foo stuff or whether it really can make a change in your life. It depends on your intent going into it. If you're going into it with your preconceived notions and your judgments, you're just going to get the same reinforcement out for your ego. But if you go in with an open mind and able to see it from their perspective, you can have a huge perspective shift and you can learn a lot. And so I think children who aren't solidified in their way of thinking and who aren't as judgmental, And we know children can learn so fast. They can learn so fast because they come in with more of an open mind, less judgment as to the information that's coming in. And that's what I try to practice every day. And yes, there are certain drugs that help make the mind more malleable, less judgmental, and able to accept the information for what it is, not what they want it to be.
Fascinating. So actually children also, they have a cognitive benefit, which is that their brains are physically more plastic. They're easier to rewire, so they're adaptable. And we lose some of that adaptability as we age, obviously. But not to get into too bogged down into details, I want to go a little bit further, and I'm sure we'll talk more about brain plasticity and stuff like that in a little bit. So I wanted to ask you, I always get inspired and curious about people who are able to make major life changes, going from what I assume your previous career was sort of, it was very well reputed. You probably had a great reputation in your community. You were considered as somebody going around the traditional route, and you put a halt on that and went a really completely different direction. Now, my curiosity when I see people who do this, and I did this myself. I used to work in private equity at a top firm, and I completely changed the direction of my life. My curiosity is, did you do this more out of love or fear? What I mean by that is, was it a love for your new lifestyle, or was it a dislike? Not, it doesn't come out as fear, but a dislike for where it was going previously.
That's a brilliant way to ask a question, actually, for anything in life, right? Is it being done out of love and fear? I think in my situation, it was half and half. Half was the fear of, I don't want to get stuck in what I'm doing and not grow and become a slave to it. Involuntary servitude, especially under the American legal system, because I accidentally had a daughter, because my girlfriend wanted to trap me into that situation. So it was running away from that. It was also running away from the feeling of insignificance, because at 30 years old, I did a sex tour through Asia. And I went through to all these different countries, and I didn't realize what a small impact what I was doing as a lawyer was having on the world, and what I could do. I could do things that are of larger impact, because as a lawyer, I had a huge ego in that I was God's gift to humanity, helping so many people. And I was, right? I had more clients, more bankruptcy clients than anybody in Northern California had ever had. I had a big law firm that practiced business insolvency and personal insolvency, and so bankruptcy, financial restructuring. And I felt so significant. I felt like a local celebrity. I felt so respected. Every time I go to a grocery store, a client comes up to me and thanks me, in front of my girlfriend, and my girlfriends are always like, wow, he's a superstar. And then I go to this Asian countries where I'm absolutely nothing. My ego means nothing. Nothing I have means nothing except for who I am and what I am in that moment, and my ability to be resourceful in that surrounding. So that was running towards something, which is maybe a new video game. I think of life as a video game. My life in the US was, I feel like, a video game that I beat as far as by most people's standards of success, accomplishment, financial security. And I wanted to try a new video game, a new challenging video game also. So it was running towards the new video game. And also, I always knew growing up in the US, my value system that I felt deep inside myself doesn't match up with the value system of the environment and culture around me in the US. And I still believe that to be true. I believe the US culture is a synthetic culture. It's not really based on something that was established over thousands of years because it's what works for human beings as biological creatures. It's a synthetic culture that was created by the modern technology and media, even from the beginning, actually, as an experiment, I think. Yeah, so I think it was 50-50, running towards love and then also running away from pain and fear.
Yeah, it's a prescriptive culture, a culture that was designed top down as opposed to a culture that evolved. And there's an evolutionary sense in the study of culture also. And when cultures evolve, there are some parts of the culture that we may not know consciously why we have them, but there are reasons that they exist. They went through that, thousands of years. So very, very fascinating.
One interesting point, Leo, is see all these books in the background. I haven't read those books, but the interesting thing is you and me as critical thinking, intellectual type people trying to transcend here, we come to the same conclusions. And how we get there might be different, but the same conclusions of like a higher level of human existence and what the ultimate culture would be to make the best environment for humans to thrive. Isn't that interesting?
It is. Actually, sometimes I feel like reading books can stifle creative thinking. And what's most important, I think personally, is having a mind that is constantly curious and questioning your environment, your preconceived notions. The way I used to think of it, this is an interview, but not to talk too much about myself, but when I was in undergrad, I used to think it's like I'm wearing glasses, and these are the glasses of the generations that came before me. And I'm looking through the world through those glasses. But those glasses can have smudges in them, and they can be not showing me how the real world is. So I always sought to remove those glasses and see the world for what I really see it to be and question everything. And I'm sure that's also what inspired a lot of your very unique outlook in life, which is fascinating beyond the bodybuilding aspect. And that's really why I wanted to talk to you. But I'll continue a little bit more. I want to talk more briefly about Enhanced Athlete, as much as you'd like to talk about it. Can I ask just how it sort of began?
Yeah, it was right after baby mama one got pregnant, and I was just going to retire from law and just be retired the rest of my life. I was just going to sell my law firm. But I can't do nothing. I have to do something. I have to use my creativity. There's something, I'm more of a creative person than I am an analytical person, actually. So I don't feel happy with myself unless I'm expressing my creativity. And I'm not an artist, I'm not a musician. So I have to find other ways to use my intellect and combine it with creativity to create something. So Enhanced Athlete also, at the time, I had very strong political beliefs about freedom, medical freedom, freedom of speech, empowering people with information to make their own informed decisions and respecting their decisions, even if they differ from ours, and having a dialogue about that. And there was already a lot of censorship at that time. I mean, we think that there's a lot of censorship now, but censorship has been around a really, really long time. And I thought it couldn't get any worse at that time. So I figured a couple things. I would try to get my message of freedom out through one of my passion hobbies, which is bodybuilding. Because I could use any pathway to do this. I could use bodybuilding. I could use nootropics. I could just preach about freedom. But I chose bodybuilding because I figured bodybuilders are already on the fringe of things. They're already maybe a little bit willing to accept. No, actually, the biggest thing was because I could teach people very quickly to question the authority, what the authorities taught them about something. That's what it was. And I picked the first compound to talk about, DNP, the fat burner.
Yes.
Because I had done a lot of research on it. I had actually first experienced it when I was about 21 years old, which is 26 years ago. I first experienced DNP because I was obsessed with chemistry before I started steroids. Started steroids at age 30, but I was obsessed with chemistry even starting at age 12. I started studying stuff. So I figured, okay, if I could show people what DNP really is instead of what they think it is, and they realize that everything that the media has told them is wrong and everything that they thought about it is wrong, then I can use that same shift to say, okay, now take that, and that now applies to everything you think about free speech and your government and the way you should live and relationships. And I also, with the polygamy thing and other women, I just knew I was always different and I was always being judged for being different. And it's like, I have to work so hard to reach a level of success and respect so that people will respect my alternative views, my alternative lifestyle, and not give me problems with it. Like if I could create more people like me who embrace freedom and respect differences and learn and take responsibility, then the world will be a better place for me to live in. Yeah, so at the beginning of Enhanced Athlete, it looks like I'm just making DNP videos, but really there's a very deep meaning behind everything that I'm doing, and it's all about education. And then the supplement side came in because Scott had got out of jail. He's a friend of mine from childhood. He got out of jail, and he needed to find work. So he saw what I was doing, and he wanted to make the supplement company side of it because there was already some supplement companies. He wanted to make it like a big thing. And he also believed in freedom, and he also wanted to fund the research, the underground research on chemistry that nobody else was willing to do and finance because this kind of stuff takes money. Who's going to invest $1 million into research on something that can't be patented, on something that's going to get censored by big pharma and the mainstream supplement industry? Nobody. So we're like, let's be the ones who pioneer this chemistry and reinvest all of the money from the supplement company into that research. And that was the beginning of Enhanced Athlete.
You mentioned a couple of things there that I find fascinating, and I just want to comment on briefly. So first of all, you're describing really starting Enhanced Athlete as a platform for you to really express your libertarian views. You could characterize them as libertarian, I suppose. And those are the principles actually that established the US originally. These are views, that, philosophical ideals that came from the French philosophers of the 18th century, and that were quickly forgotten by the early 1900s in the US, really by 1901, when the US started going and taking over nations in South America and in the Philippines, or before 1901. It really started with actually Hawaii. You would think, in terms of conquering them, and the government changed dramatically after that. So it's really American, actually, even though it doesn't see, we're being censored by the federal government, but the way you think is really the real original American way of thinking. The second thing I wanted to comment on is, it's quite interesting. I don't know if you noticed this. By the way, I used your DNP from Enhanced Athlete before, and it was really quite interesting. And, I've been following you actually ever since you began on YouTube, very long time ago, probably the first 6 months or so. But recently I've lost a bit of touch because I don't know how to use Snapchat and the various things. And when they censored you, it was harder to find you. But I just wanted to comment that there's a longevity researcher called David Sinclair. He's from Harvard. He's actually one of the leading researchers in the world of sirtuins. And he wrote a book recently called, I forgot what it's called, but he has one book out. And in the book, he has a couple of pages on DNP. You thought you might find it interesting. And the reason why he mentions DNP is, of course, because actually in the longevity world right now, there's a lot of research into this concept of putting yourself in very cold environments so that your body shivers and so your body produces more heat, because this not only has benefits on the metabolism, but also on things that enhance longevity, like maybe even potentially sirtuins. I don't know the details of them exactly. But I'll move on briefly from this. I'm very curious, when I used to watch your original videos, I really loved to watch Trevor. Trevor has just a lovable personality. How did you meet Trevor? And another thing I want to say before you even answer the question, I really admire how much you two have remained friends over such a long time period. And it shows something about your personal ethics of loyalty and so on. Really admirable.
Trevor and I are opposite personalities. It's very hard for us actually to be friends. In order to be friends, we have to stay very focused on our common goal, which is the development of chemistry to improve quality of life and also the fight for freedom. Absent that, Trevor and I don't have anything in common as far as personality and any other interests. So it's those things that always kept us bound together. I first met him at a bodybuilding. Okay, the bodybuilding competition was the next day. But the night before, it was at my house. It was like a spray tan party where we spray tan all the bodybuilders at my house. And this just allows me, because I'm trying to get test subjects. I'm trying to connect with people in bodybuilding. I'm obsessed with the competition bodybuilding because that's like the NASCAR of cars or the Formula One, where the technology is being tested. And it's different every time. And you can learn so much through a bodybuilding prep. And you can learn so much about longevity, and not that they do it right. You can actually learn what they do wrong. But you can just learn so much about the human body when you push it to its absolute limit. And bodybuilding is a way that I could actually be involved with pushing the body to its limit and learn. And so I was talking about how I was on DNP for my prep. That's how I got ready. Mm-hmm. And Trevor said that he used DNP to lose 22 pounds of fat in 10 days, which is 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds of fat per day, using about 1 gram to 1.2 grams of DNP per day. And that blew my mind because that's what I was looking for. I'm looking for the people who do the most extreme stuff so that I can learn from it. And then I did one video with him and I interviewed him about it, and it was a huge hit. The audience was like, oh my gosh, I want to hear more. I wasn't sure I was going to go. I wasn't sure if the audience was just going to all completely hate it because now I've jumped too far to the extreme and they're going to think, okay, now I'm just reckless and dangerous, or whether it was going to be more curiosity and more follow-up questions. It was more follow-up questions. So then it was me chasing Trevor around trying to extract this information and Trevor trying to hide from me. Because Trevor doesn't want to be public. Trevor doesn't want to be famous. Yeah. Trevor doesn't want to be on camera. He's an underground researcher and he prefers to stay underground, and he understands how dangerous it is to present this information, and he doesn't want to be under attack. He doesn't want the attention. He just wants to sit in a laboratory all day and experiment on himself and pretty much die with all of that knowledge, or spread it to a few of his clients. But even then, like, he wasn't obsessed with training people for money. It was just the obsession with cracking the code and figuring things out that other people don't want us to know, right? Almost like a conspiracy theorist of bodybuilding chemistry.
So for our audience that may be younger, Trevor is the classic archetype of the forum poster from the early 2000s. So I don't know if, Tony, you were involved in the forums much, but in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, 5, there were forums called Anabolic Minds. I'm sure Trevor was on there, Anabolic Muscle, a bunch of underground steroid forums. And Trevor fits the perfect archetype of the kind of personality there. And he was always camera shy, which was endearing. And it was always interesting to see you two interview, or you interview him, where you're really staying on point, and he's going a little bit off topic, and you're like, no, I'm trying to go back on this topic. It made a great couple, and I was personally disheartened when YouTube tried to censor you. I really tried to shut down everything. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know how much detail you want to talk about it, but it was really unfortunate, and I feel like you required from the community more support. And even if it wouldn't have made a difference, but it should have been there. And instead of that, recently I've noticed that I'm not as in touch with the bodybuilding media recently, but in the last 6 months or so, I see a lot of people trying to be antagonistic toward you without mentioning any names. And it's funny to me because some of these people are pro bodybuilders, and they're actually lying about their personal usage on I know they're lying. And using doses that they don't really use. I live in Los Angeles. I have some famous athletic friends. I go to Gold's Gym. I hear bodybuilders, professionals talk about what they use in person. And then I see others go online and say that they use 800 milligrams of testosterone, and that Tony Hughes is irresponsible for promoting the use of these stuff. In fact, Tony never, and not to talk too much, but Tony does not even promote megadosing, really. And Tony, as anyone who watches interviews knows, he does not even use things very consistently, which is actually often how the harm comes. But anyway, this is a bit of an aside.
Yeah, so back to the Trevor real quick. One of the things that fascinated me about him was hyperplasia, the creation of new muscle cells, because he barely worked out, and yet he's like 265 pounds ripped all year round, like a professional bodybuilder. How is it possible that you have this guy that, so I that's why I wanted him with me full time, to see if there was some kind of hidden secret. And there are a lot, but it's actually all common sense if you dig deep enough into the science. Okay. And the next bodybuilder's lying. Yeah. Even the most honest bodybuilders online, and I don't know if they do it intentionally or they're just forget. But let's say like you're asking me my first steroid cycle, what got me huge? Well, I'm going to tell you to the best of my memory, but my memory could be completely wrong. I could have forgotten that I used IGF. Like maybe that was the most important thing. So it's a lot of lying, and it's a lot of bad memory, and it's a lot of bodybuilders don't know what they're actually taking because their coach is telling them what to take. And even Trevor, he would give a lot of his clients stuff. They don't even know what it is. He'd just say, take this, trust me. He wouldn't even tell them. So there's a lot of stuff like this that prevents bodybuilders from being accurate sources of information. Now, as far as the antagonism more recently, yeah, so in the beginning, in the very beginning, there was half antagonism and half support. And I took each of my haters, and there was so few audience back then that I would take each negative comment and I would address it to that person where I could tell what perspective they were coming from, and I would shift it. And my strongest, most loyal long-term fans were the initial haters of what I was doing, because I was taking them along a path, and I always have intended to take them along a path, starting with something sensationalist to even catch their attention, because otherwise they're not even going to watch what I have to say. Then taking them through this path where I'm actually starting them right here, and I'm just walking them along this path to open their mind and understand the foundation of the biochemistry that we're using. Then I can start talking about a supplement. I can start talking about creatine, or I can start talking about trenbolone. But now we have context. And that's what everybody's missing, is context, how this fits in. So that's why I designed the anabolic matrix. I got to rename it because that name is banned on everything now.
Is it really?
Yeah. So now it's the enhanced muscle matrix. That is not banned on anything, so I have to switch to that name. So I will publish the final enhanced muscle matrix sometime soon, but people have seen many versions of it, and that's what helps put everything into context. Now, the people who are criticizing me, they're watching one video. It's like reading a book, and they're opening to page 432 and reading one paragraph. They've completely missed the context of everything before. And the problem with the censorship is that since so many of the videos have been deleted that lead up to the conclusions that I'm making today, people aren't seeing the math behind the final answer. You know, I'm trying to show people the equation. I'm not trying to hide the ball, but how can I get that equation out when all of this material is so highly censored?
Now, just for the audience to know, are all the videos on your website? Have they all been re-uploaded there? The old videos?
So there's a website, Anabolic TV, which has been shadow banned by Google, which is blocked by Instagram, which is blocked by Facebook, every social media platform. So it's hard to grow it because now that website has been censored. Now the videos are on there, not all the videos, because the lawyers told me that about 15% of probably the most hardcore videos I can't show publicly, but those videos are starting to pop up on uncensored platforms now. So more and more like on BitChute and maybe soon LBRY.TV and these other websites, some of those super censored videos will start showing up. And what's interesting about these videos is it's not telling people to do something dangerous, but I do believe it threatens the system because the system is to try to control people. And these videos really open up their mind. And if you even start down this path and keep following it, it opens up your mind to question everything that we're told by the American government, Western civilization, the FDA, the CDC. And it really does threaten the system because that was my intent, not as a terrorist, but as someone, like you said, trying to fight for civil liberties for individuals to make their own decisions.
Absolutely. Just to go back for a second, I just wanted to say, you said that the reason that the bodybuilders probably don't report accurate dosages is maybe they were being led by a trainer, or they were literally forgetful, or you didn't mention another thing, which is I think probably the main cause is that they feel that revealing their own dose may lead some person who doesn't have the opportunity to become a top bodybuilder anyway to harm himself. And another reason, which is very valid, is that you always look cooler to say you take less. Because if I'm 300 pounds and I only took 500 milligrams of testosterone, but you're taking thousands, I'm just better than you. My genetics, which every bodybuilder uses the term genetics, they don't know anything about genetics. They really don't. But my genetics are better than you. It sounds cool. So why wouldn't you do that instead of really revealing the truth, which is I've been all around the world with bodybuilders like you have in the Middle East. You went to Kuwait recently. And what I found on average is that they tend to take 4 or 5 grams of androgens and be really focused on IGF-1, which means they take HGH, they combine it with insulin, and if they can get it good in IGF-1, they take that as well. So they keep mTOR, which is the largest growth pathway in the body, the mechanistic target of rapamycin, on all the time. And if they have relatively good genetics, instead of growing their head and their abdomen, they'll get what Trevor experienced, which is this growth of the muscular structure. But anyway, leaving this for a second, I want to talk about some more things. So briefly, I wanted to ask, is your Snapchat still active, just for your viewers to know?
Yeah, the Snapchat from the beginning, and it's called Enhanced Athlete, no space, that never got deleted, even from the beginning. But the clips get censored a lot, like the actual things that are posted, but the account is still the same. That used to have a huge following, and Snapchat started dying off a little bit more when Instagram picked up, but Snapchat's starting to come back because Snapchat has less censorship than Instagram. Still has censorship, but there's less. You can still post more to Snapchat than you can to Instagram.
Interesting. And this brings me to the next question, which is really about exhibitionism. So I noticed that you love people to see into your life, and I'm naturally a bit of a private person. I find it interesting. Do you get, how do you experience, what gives you pleasure about that? Is it the communication with people, or is it?
I think part of it, if you ask me that 10 different times, I'd give you 10 different answers. But right now what pops up in my head is that to really love someone, you have to understand them, and understanding is loving. And I know I may push certain elements that are more shocking, like polygamy and private. But what I really like to do, like what I'm really passionate about, is sharing with people what problems I'm facing and then how I'm overcoming those problems, and learning together with my audience. And also I get a lot of feedback from the audience, like a lot. Like if I'm saying, oh, I'm having trouble sleeping, and here's what I'm taking, I'll have a lot of really intelligent audience members message me and say, hey, try this, or hey, I'm working, I'm researching this, you should try this, or this is my experience with that. And so I get to learn a lot from credible people. And, back to the forums, the problem is you have some people that are trying very hard to give inaccurate information. You have other people that are giving intentional misinformation, and you have other people who are just feeding their egos. Mm-hmm. But I found that with my fan base, my friends of freedom, like we are really helping each other, and they're very credible, and there's no malintent. We're able to just learn so much. And it's really a community. And unfortunately, my community is kind of spread out all over the place, trying to find a new home because of censorship. But just even across messengers. So if I post something on Instagram story and I'm working through an issue, I will get feedback about that issue in real time that I can then experiment with the next day. And it also helps me feel a sense of community. Actually, another one of the main motivations for it was, I think that we're all a little bit weird and we're all trying to fit in. And I don't like that. I want us all to express what's different about our individuality. And if I can share, because forget the video, let's say just with friends, I'm telling friends like, hey, I've had chlamydia 4 times, an STD, right? And at first people look at me like, oh my God, that's disgusting. Then they'll say, wait a second, I've had chlamydia before too. And I like push it back and hide it from everybody. I'm like, no, let's talk about it. Or, hey, I've got this weird fetish. Or, hey, my girlfriend has this fetish. She wants me to pee on her. So I just try to talk about all the things that are normally hidden by our modern synthetic culture and start finding common ground. And it's kind of like what's happening right now with the current pandemic situation, which is the government and the media is trying to make us think that we're all okay and, with the whole situation, and shame us into giving up our freedoms for the greater good of health. But if you actually put all the individuals in a room together, most individuals are going to choose freedom over the misinformation and control. But people don't know that because they're not able to share that with each other. So I figured if I can share the weird things about my life, other people would be more comfortable sharing the weird things. We'd find things that we had in common. We'd have less suicide, because I see a lot of suicide in men is because they feel like they're weird. They're not understood. They feel like, they're an outcast, when really they're just like us. They just are subscribing to this false society that's telling them they should be something else.
Yeah, loneliness is one of the most dangerous. People that are lonely have cardiovascular health outcomes just from that. And it's really admirable creating this kind of community where it's open. And this is one of the things I like about Big Lenny, who I know you've talked to before as well. I brought him on the show 2 weeks ago. He's a good friend of mine. Big Lenny, he calls it cookie cutters. He doesn't want people to just fit into society. And even that sounds like a little bit of an infantile thing at first, but when you think about it, it's not. He's very deep, and what he's saying is really motivational for those kind of people that may feel like outcasts, may feel that they're alone, may feel that they have to hide parts of themselves to fit into some really actually artificial community, How
about basic bitch? That was a term that went viral for a while there.
Yeah, it went viral, and then it was being used by the wrong people as well. So it was. So, you mentioned polygamy. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Let's talk about that briefly. So when you say polygamy, are you talking about polygamy or polygyny, like where a man has more than one female, or is it what they call today, what do they call that? Polyamory, which is real polygamy, meaning long-term relationships on both ends?
Well, my preference for a relationship is like, I've got this Thai girlfriend here. She's cleaning. She cleans and cooks all day. They really are amazing.
Oh yeah,
So I've got her, and like I found her. This is just one example. I found her, and instantly I thought, this is a woman that is, number one, very kind, because that's what attracts me to a woman, because I sort of think ahead like 30 years. Like, if I'm in a bad situation, is this woman really going to take care of me out of love? And the people around me, and make me look good because I'm a kind person? Is she going to reflect that we are kind people? So I want long-term relationships. I do like one night stands every once in a while for sure. Well, frequently, but I don't give it much thought, right? I like a long-term relationship where I can really get to know someone. I can support them. They can support me. And I just like having multiple ones of those because I would get too bored with one, and because I've never found the perfect girl. So, my brother found the perfect girl for him. He's happy. He's 100% satisfied. He doesn't need another woman. I respect that. Sometimes I'm jealous of that. It makes life so simple. But I've dated a lot of women, and I've never found one that was what I need to be a 10 in every category. I would find that I would have one girl that was amazing in bed, but I can't take her in public because she's got no manners. Or I find another girl that's like really beautiful, but she's stupid. Or another girl that I connect with so intellectually in private, but like she can't carry on a conversation in public. Or a woman that wants to go on adventures, but she'll never stay home with me and snuggle. Or a woman that wants to snuggle at home, but she'll never go on an adventure. So like, I can't find it all in one woman, maybe because I am such a complicated person that there's no one woman that can fit all of my complication. So yeah, it's not marriage, right? Polygamy is marriage. It's not marriage, but it's kind of like that because I support my girlfriends the same way a husband would support a wife. And I have that level of loyalty and commitment to them. And I want them to have that level of loyalty and commitment to me. Now, that doesn't mean they can't sleep with other people. I mean, if Rose really wants to sleep with someone else, I mean, let's go extreme here for a minute because it's your platform and I can't. If I put this on my platform, I'm going to get deleted. But this is just to give you an extreme example. Like Rose and I had a ladyboy the other night, and we all did everything possible together. And so the ladyboy is actually having sex with Rose, like another penis going inside of Rose. And I'm like supporting this, and Rose is so happy about it. And I'm happy, she's happy. And there's like this level of trust and unconditional love and non-judgment coming from that. And that whole experience is something that I think most people in Western civilization will never experience, where you completely unless they're on a lot of drugs, but then it's not the same situation,
Actually, and there's, just for our viewers to hear this isn't just pure, some people may hear this and think this is unnatural. The reality, though, is that monogamy was an advent that came with the Neolithic expansion, where because of farming, because of agriculture and inheritance, this is evolutionary psychologists, this is what they believe brought in monogamy. That's the current belief today. It was because people were inheriting and you couldn't be completely sure whose child it was. Historically, it seems to be that people had long-term relationships with multiple people in different, I know this, for example, about the Arabs. Before Islam came to the Arabs, this is well known in ancient Arabic literature, they were not polygynous, they were polygamous, where women would marry several men at a time, and men would marry several women, actually. And what would happen is basically the man who was the most potent sexually would impregnate the woman by chance, and so maybe she might get the best genetic qualities from him, but she would decide who would raise the child, and usually off the man's esteem in the society or wealth and so on. And so this existed in a lot of cultures historically. A lot of the monogamy also came along with not just the farming, but the Judeo-Christian religions, which came out of also the Middle East, actually. But anyway, getting away from this for a second.
One last thing, Leo. So how this evolved is I had a girlfriend that I loved so much. I thought, oh my God, this is the woman I'm going to marry when I was like 20, 21 years old. And I got bored of having sex with her. Like no matter what I tried, like it never had that excitement that it had in the beginning. So that's when I was thinking like, okay, I can either just accept that or I can try to increase the quality of my life and add some variety. So that was one thought that was happening. And then later I find out that most men I know are cheating on their wives, and it's all this hidden thing, and then they get caught and it's a disaster. And as a lawyer, I saw it all the time in my clients. Yeah. And as a lawyer, I have to be very conservative. I wear a suit every day. I'm trying to cater to more expensive client or higher status clients. I have to be the conservative role. And so I have to play into this fake society, whereas behind the scenes, everybody's cheating on everybody pretty much. And I just don't like the lying because my dad was a sort of like a polygamist also, but he would lie about it, and it put him in such a stressful situation. And I saw him, part of him got off on the excitement, but part of him, like the stress really wore on him of not being able to be honest. And I didn't want to end up to my dad about not being honest. So then I just tried as an experiment going the other direction, which is where I would get a girlfriend and I would say, look, I'm going to have multiple girlfriends. That doesn't mean you're going to get any less of me. I'm going to give you all the same love and support as if I didn't have other girlfriends, but I'm also going to be totally honest with you that I'm going to have and accumulate other girlfriends. And then it started actually working. So this is what completely changed my view on it, because I was raised as a beta male thinking that you have to put a woman on a pedestal and dedicate your life to her in order to earn her, which is a bad path, I think, for most men's quality of life. And puts them in a little
happiness.
Yeah, it takes away their manhood in a lot of ways. And so, and I was really honest about it. All of a sudden I started becoming a baller. Like, other women started seeing I was desired and wanting to be with me, and I started becoming more attractive the more women I was with. But I always had this push, this resistance of women trying, they're attracted to me because they can't have me. As soon as they have me at the exclusion of all other women, all of a sudden they try to start pushing me down, controlling me, and putting me back in the beta male situation so that I can't go out and get another woman. A good example is like the Ferrari is a chick magnet. In the beginning, the girl wants to drive in your Ferrari. She wants to take pictures of the Ferrari. She wants her friends to see the Ferrari. And then later in the relationship, she wants you to sell the Ferrari because she knows it's a chick magnet.
Absolutely.
But when you sell the Ferrari, now she's not attracted to you anymore. And the Ferrari is a metaphor. You know.
This is such a good point, really. You touched on a couple of things. About the last one is that, so there's this interesting phenomenon, right? You start dating a lady, especially in the Western world, and originally she's attracted to you for your strength, for your character, you know, and slowly sometimes you find she tries to push that down, and you find a lot of men here that you described as beta males who are sort of chasing their woman around, doing whatever she wants. And the interesting part of it, which you didn't mention, is that she loses interest when she sees this change. I'm not saying for about an old woman, but many women will try to control the man, and once they succeed, they will lose interest, and she will be the one actually cheating because with a man that she can't control. So it's actually weird. So if you give them what they want, they lose interest. They don't want to be given what they want sometimes. And actually, you know, it's pretty interesting. I also have a long history with polygamy as well. When was the first time you had or not polygamy, but this kind of thing? When was the first time you had two girlfriends? Was that at 21 when you were describing after that lady?
Before I had multiple girlfriends, I had signed up after I was done with the girlfriend that I was very committed to, and we lost interest in each other, I guess is the best way to say it. I went on Adult Friend Finder, which is just to find girls for sex. And at that time, the app really worked well. Now it's just a scam. I tried it since then. Yeah, but back then, it really was like 40-year-old, really horny women, oftentimes in marriages, who just wanted sex on the side. Not that they were cheating. Like some of these women, they just had no more sex in their life and they wanted sex. And here I am, like 21 years old, wanting to develop another self-improvement thing that I used to do is develop sexual skills and like really put energy into it. Not necessarily time, but like 100% energy, which is the opposite now. I put no energy into it. So at the time I would create this rotation of women like, okay, this girl comes over Monday, this girl comes over Tuesday, but the girls were only for sex. And I wanted to convert that into actual relationships. I was like, okay, the sex thing is nice, but like, you know, with one girl, for example, maybe I was with her for 6 months and it was the most amazing sexual relationship. But then at 6 months, she's like, okay, I'm done with the sexual relationship. Like I've got what I need out of this phase of my life. Now I'm going to go look for marriage. And I was like, wait a second. I was thinking this was going to go on forever. Like, I don't like this investing 6 months into someone and then they're gone. So I'd rather actually have this rotation where I keep these women the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I tried this actually. I seem like a combination, a little bit of you and your brother. I tried this when I was 18 and I continued having polygamous relationships until I met my wife now. My wife turned out to be the perfect person for me. I was just very lucky, and till today, I'm just very fortunate. But I really believed in that lifestyle. There's a lot of drama that comes along with it, which Tony may not be revealing to the audience at the moment, but it is a little bit, it gets a little hectic sometimes. But I used to do what you did, and I used to do also that with, we'll get into more of this in a second. I want to ask you briefly, so you mentioned you were very focused on sexual performance when you were younger, and I think a lot of men go through that, especially in their early 20s or late teenage years, and I did as well. And one thing I noticed about using androgens for a long time period, I'm just curious, have you noticed that with the testicular atrophy comes less pleasure? I've never heard anyone talk about this, but I noticed it myself when I had testicular atrophy, that there was slightly less pleasure for myself.
Okay, if I look at two extremes, so there's sometimes where my balls are just absolutely massive and just full, and maybe that's because I'm doing some kind of protocol to do that, or just naturally my balls are pretty big and full. But then there was this time when I took Tren, and I've experimented with every compound, but there's this one specific time where I went really high on the Trenbolone and my balls disappeared. Like they sucked up inside. They were gone. There was no, you couldn't feel a testicle. And I was still having sex at that time, and it was still pleasurable. Like it was hard to come, but the pleasure was still there. So I don't, yeah, but then now I notice a difference. Like so at that extreme, it didn't make a difference. But now I notice a little bit of a difference. If my balls don't feel quite as full, I'm just less. The pleasure is good, but I'm less excited about the orgasm. It's more connected to the orgasm, I think.
So from what you're saying, I'm understanding that you basically take HCG all year round.
Right. Well, I don't take it every day. I believe that you do desensitize.
Oh, you think that the luteinizing hormone?
It's more like I'll take a 5,000 IU vial and I'll just use it till it's done, and then I'll wait a while. And so maybe I'll use a 5,000 IU vial in like 2 weeks, and then I'll just not take it for 2 weeks, and then I'll take it for another 2 weeks, that kind of thing. And then I also use the like Enhanced Labs has the Blue Ox test booster, which has a lot of stuff that does similar things to what HCG does. So I'm always taking that.
Interesting. Okay. Another thing you mentioned briefly, sorry to ask too many questions. You say interesting things that need to be dug into. So you were talking about how people live a dishonorable lifestyle, cheating on their wives. You didn't mention the word dishonor, but it really is a lack of honor when you're living with someone that you're supposed to be committed to, and you have urges that are not being satisfied. You go behind her back, but in a way that it would break her heart if she knew. And Tony is actually taking a really ethical stance, which is you be upfront with the lady ahead of time. You tell her, look, I'm not going to be satisfied with that. I'll give you, the things that you need, but I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to be a coward, and I'm not going to lie to you and trick you. And I really feel that is way superior to this kind of cheating culture that exists in some places in the US and even among it's common in certain subcultures. I won't get into any certain ones, but so it's something honorable, and it should be encouraged to at least be honest. Moving on from this stuff, I want to ask you something interesting. Big Lenny, I was talking to him the other day, and I had to ask him up front. I said, Big Lenny, I know that you love transsexuals, but there's something peculiar about your love for transsexuals, is that you really like African-American transsexuals only, which is peculiar, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just he has a racial preference. On the other hand, Tony Huge is actually more similar to most people who like transsexuals in that you tend to prefer very feminine-looking Thai transsexuals, who are the most feminine-looking transsexuals that I know of in the world. I've been to Thailand since 2001. I've seen a lot of them. They're very good-looking as ladies. Now, I want to ask you, first of all, why do you have a preference particularly for Asian women? Because I also noticed that your baby mamas are also Asian. Is it something cultural? And then second of all, why specifically the Asian transsexuals? Or is it the same reason? I don't know.
So I'll answer the more exciting one first, the transsexuals thing. Well, I think the black transsexuals are more likely to have a huge penis. So if the reason why a guy likes the tranny thing is because they like just that extreme, almost cartoon, bigger than life, they've got tits, they've got a big penis, and some do. Like there's some guys here in Thailand that love the lady boys, but they want the lady boy with the huge penis.
Interesting.
And then also black chicks are the personality difference is black chicks are are like, just in general, just women, not just transsexual, are very aggressive and very blunt, whereas Asians are generally more subdued and more submissive. And so if you want the girl to be really aggressive, then you probably want, more like Black or Latina and less Asian. Although I don't think Lenny has experienced very many Asians, because he's over in Florida where you've got Latinas and you've got Blacks and you just don't have a lot of Asians. I don't think he has enough reference point to really know whether he would like an Asian ladyboy. For me, I like femininity. So I have no problem watching another guy have sex. I have no problem having a threesome, 2 guys, 1 girl, whatever. I don't even mind a guy massaging me, almost to the point of being into an intimate massage. Doesn't bother me. Like, I'm not homophobic whatsoever. But as far as actually making me really excited and really hard, it's the feminine polarity. And it just so happens that ladyboys, which are men that have become women, and they have to work hard at it, because that's, that means potentially having surgeries. It means learning how to talk like a woman, learning how to act like a woman. These ladyboys are better women than most women as far as how they seduce a man. So like, women are so lazy because cock comes so easy to them. They don't have to do anything. But the ladyboys actually have to learn how to be a woman. And if women did the same thing, I would be more attracted to women too. If women actually read, they can read books, but look at us men. We're looking at how to please a woman. We're looking at pickup artist stuff. We actually put effort into this, and women are freaking lazy. Ladyboys are not lazy. They put the effort in and they know a man. And for anybody that thinks that they would never sleep with a ladyboy, I am in Thailand and I watch guys go home with ladyboys that they have no idea they're ladyboys, and they even have surgical pussies, and they probably still have sex with them, and they probably still never know they slept with a ladyboy who they think was the hottest girl they've ever been with.
This is true. This is empirically true. If a gentleman goes to Thailand, he'll usually change his mind. Now, the interesting thing about Thailand is it has a long history, like ancient almost history, of having what they call ladyboys or transsexual women. And also this is the case actually also in India, by the way. It's actually in the Hindu religion or the caste system. There's actually a group of something like that. I don't know too many details about it, but I read Wikipedia a lot for some reason. I came across this thing. Now, what I was going to ask you is, with the transsexual acceptance movement in the U.S., has this had any effect on you in Thailand or some of the other places, in the Philippines?
It's horrible. Now, you'd think that I would say it's amazing because it's an acceptance thing of something that I like. But America approaches everything wrong, and they like poison. They spread it through the rest of the world. So here in Thailand, we have a beautiful system for transsexuals and ladyboys, which is they can use either bathroom. Nobody freaking cares what bathroom they use. Do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. There is no judgment. Nobody's fighting amongst each other for anything. This is a Buddhist culture of love and mutual respect. Do what makes you happy. Yeah. And in America, it's exactly the opposite. It's like, how do we put this person into a box? How do we judge them? How do we make the rules different for them? Because we're trying to say it's the same, but it's not. We're isolating them and drawing attention to them in a way that is in the same way that you do with any culture, when you're trying to push everybody against each other so that the government or whatever powers that be can at any time use any one group to attack another group by using the media. So I just think it should be mutual love and respect and do whatever you want. And the change shouldn't be about forcing people to allow certain bathrooms or whatever. It should be more about a movement of love and respect and acceptance. And in Thailand, it's funny because, in America, transsexuals it's just like a circus show, or people find offense to it because it's against Christianity or something like that. But in Thailand, like, they're super respected. They have the respect of the women. They have the respect of women. A ladyboy is able to go into a group of women and be one of the women. Mm-hmm. And earn that community respect, and then also, because they have the skills of a man, they can lead that group of women. So you'll notice, like, ladyboys are oftentimes the leader of a group of women, and they're usually very successful because they have some of the men's logic and drive. And they also have the seduction. They can actually get more of what they want because they are more seductive to both women and men. Like they just understand because they had to put that extra effort in on how to get what they want, basically.
This is very coherent. Now, I want to ask you, how is the Philippines a little bit different culturally in that regard? Is it similar? I mean, they do have a long practice of it, but...
You know, it's definitely in the Philippines. And the ladyboys in the Philippines, I've had some of the best experiences. Like I've made friends with some ladyboys in the Philippines. They're just some of the coolest people I've ever met. Like it's like hanging out with a girlfriend and hanging out with your best guy friend at the same time. It's so freaking cool. But they don't have access to as much money for surgeries and things. So what you'll find in the Philippines is like they've got the mannerisms down and all this, but they haven't had as many of the surgeries. So they can't as easily trick you. I mean, I've been tricked in both, but it's not as easy for them to trick you in the Philippines as it is in Thailand.
Now, what attracts you to Thailand? Is there something else other than the ladyboys? It's something about the culture, the food, the Buddhism, I've been there a couple of times, probably spent a month in total. I really was fond of it, but the last time I went was in 2006 maybe. And what I've heard is it's gone way more commercial and it's very different. Is that so? Well,
unfortunately, you know, I come here to feel freedom and to get away from Western civilization, not completely and not forever. And I'm always going to be attached to everybody and travel the world still, but I like to get closer to Buddhist culture and a little further away from Western civilization. But unfortunately, American media is blasting every country in the world with misinformation to try to get everyone in the world to conform to this synthetic society that benefits the mega corporation and gives up civil liberties. And the same thing is happening here in Thailand. And, you know, the Thai government is something I can't legally talk about because you're not allowed to say things about the Thai government. But I'll say that China and America both invest heavily in Thailand, and that influences Thailand in very negative ways. Thailand itself, I think, is one of the greatest countries on earth because I think that they're living as natural as possible, like with as little influence from outside and actually following what benefits humans as evolved creatures. And I think Thailand is way far, like 100 years in the future beyond. America's like, we seem like we're scientifically advanced, but we're missing some of the fundamentals that make humans fulfilled and happy. And they've got all that here. But it's also because of the cost that it's really cheap. Like this condo here, Leo, is $750 a month. It is a huge condo with 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom. It is a penthouse. It is right on the ocean.
You can get that in Alabama.
It's what?
You can get that in Alabama. not overlooking the ocean, but at $750.
yeah. So it's like Alabama prices, but on the ocean, right by the action with all the.
But it was even cheaper than that back in 2000, in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
internet speed, technology, the infrastructure here is very strong. I mean, I love Philippines, but they're missing the infrastructure. Like me being able to talk to you on this high speed thing, I can get a lot of my research done. I'm still constantly researching, learning, and I don't like to be bottlenecked with a lack of technology or access to things. Like here, I can go to the technology mall and I can buy any electronic. It's all imported from China, imported from the US, whatever. I have access to everything here.
Now, I wanted to make a small recommendation. I'm sure you've heard of it, but there's a Buddhist tradition in Thailand called the Thai forest monks. Have you heard of them?
No.
They do some really exemplary meditation practices. They're the people who invented the mindful meditation that spread to the US. And if you get a chance to spend a couple of weeks in the forest with them, you might find it a life-changing opportunity. That's one of the things I'm really looking forward to doing myself. Their meditation practice is, in my opinion, the #1 in the world. And it's an interesting history. You can even check it out on just Wikipedia. Just search Thai forest tradition, Buddhist forest tradition. They live in the forest and they meditate there. It's a very interesting tradition. Okay, another brief question about that. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, well, and even Rose here, and even like I do hire a lot of women to spend time with me also. And even those girls who are in, let's say, the sex trade, they meditate. They pray to Buddha. They're very spiritual, like really spiritual, not like a religion, not like there's a specific God or they have to go to church, but they're deeply, and meditation is a huge part of it. It's built into their daily life. Yeah.
Very powerful. Yeah. We're learning that now in science, but a brief question, side note. Have you heard of a gentleman named the bodybuilder in Thailand?
Yes.
Oh,
His
yeah.
name's Dan.
I don't know him, but you know what happened? By chance yesterday, I guess he found me on Instagram. I have a tiny Instagram page. I post a lot of good stuff, but people don't come across me. And he found me, and I don't really know how to use Instagram. I think he did like a live or not like a live, a story about my page, and my page increased by 25% followers in one day. So if he sees this, I want to thank you, bodybuilder in Thailand. I don't know anything about him actually, but I thought it was a cool name. I think Thailand used to be more of a refuge for people like that, though. In like 10 years ago, it's not as much of a refuge anymore, is it? In terms of the ability to get PEDs, good PEDs like the Thai Dianabols and things like that.
Yeah, it still is. You just have to look a little harder, but it still is a refuge for bodybuilding and bodybuilding chemistry, because it's not that the laws are so different from the U.S. The laws are actually, a lot of the laws that are created around these things are created by, let's say, large lobbying groups that do it through America and then trickle the influence from America to the rest of the world. So still a lot of the laws are similar. It's just that they see no reason to enforce it because it's not a problem. Like steroids have never been a problem. And in America, it's like, even though it's not a problem, because of this bureaucracy and this machine that needs to be fed and this control and this nanny state, we've got to enforce against steroids. And in Thailand, they're basically like, well, steroids isn't hurting anybody, so why are we going to allocate energy and time and put people in prison for something like for example, there's a guy that got busted here for not having a work permit. That's a serious thing. Now his whole condo is full of steroids, right? They don't care about that at all. They care about the fact he was working without a work permit, because they care about, they don't want people coming here and making money off Thailand where it would cost a Thai citizen a job. Like, in America, we're like, oh, open the borders, do whatever we want. And then even Americans think like, oh, we're not being inviting enough. We're not giving enough government benefits to immigrants. But here it's like really strict. If America took the position that Thailand did as far as immigration and all that, American citizens would be calling it like a Nazi concentration camp. But it's just nationalism. So that's where their focus is. Nationalism. It's not on, bothering people and taking their privacy or taking their passion away, like bodybuilding, for example.
Let's talk briefly about what you mentioned, the harms of PED use. The U.S. obviously really tries to regulate the use of testosterone, androgens in general. And the supposed reason they do this is because they're very dangerous for people. They're not even, I don't think, that focused on youth, but rather just people in general. But what's interesting to observe is that the nations most focused on this, such as Sweden, are also the nations that are the most feminist. And what I feel is that there's an undertone of a dislike of masculinism in general. The problem with steroids is they make people more masculine. And that's what I see it as, personally. There's some undertone there, because there's no justification that you can say, oh, they're harming our healthcare system because they're going to, what are they going to have? Kidney damage, so they need kidney replacement, or they're going to have some heart damage. Most of these people work and they have insurance. Well, maybe, I don't know how many of them have insurance, but if you're going to legalize, for example, which I'm not against legalizing at all, psilocybin mushrooms or I think LSD now somewhere in California, but those things do cause people to become permanent schizophrenics. And those people tend to have to depend on the system. And that is a lot of payment, because you have to put these people in facilities, you have to pay for them long term. But people don't seem to have an issue with that. But it's this concept that you'll become over-masculinized. You'll get angry at people. What do you think about that? The feminization of it.
You're absolutely right. And I had this theory for a long time, because I'm just seeing, I guess I'm kind of able to get myself out of it and see it from a 30,000 foot view of what's really happening, and that things aren't just coincidence. and where the direction of America is going and its influence on the world. And I talked to a politician about this, who's well connected, because I have a lot of underground people I communicate with to get my facts so that I'm making informed decisions and I understand what's really going on for myself, even if I'm not allowed to talk about it. Mm. And I was talking to this politician, and he said, yes, it is a strategic movement to feminize America because it's easy to control a feminine culture. It's very hard to control masculinity because masculinity leads to free thinking. And free thinking is dangerous for the system. If you want to control the population, you have to feminize them. So they are feminizing the men so the men don't stand up for their rights or don't question authority. And that sounds crazy because at first it sounds crazy, like a lot of women are probably thinking, no, I'm free thinking. But biologically, it's not true. The way that it works is the woman adapts the man's values. Like when she marries a man, even traditionally, like it's the man's values and direction and everything, and the woman adopts that, and they're well calibrated for that. Like try to have a man go into a relationship where he adopts everything as far as the woman's values and philosophies. Usually the man's going to be completely miserable, but the woman is very happy to adopt the values of a strong man that she's attracted to and respects and wants to build a family with. And so they're basically turning the men into these women that will adopt whatever values come from a higher power. And so, yes, it's not about health. People if you want to understand how the government works and you want to come in with the right perspective, you have to understand the government does not, and when I say the government, I am speaking very broadly. The government is one component of a huge network of people who control the world, and you and me, we are peasants, and there's this class up here that controls everything, and it's just how the world works and has always worked. Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing from politicians that I know.
Here's a way to look at it that we can't argue with. I think everybody, man and woman, would agree that on average, women are more emotional than men. So that's step number one. Then we can agree that is partially hormonal. And there's other components, but it's partially hormonal. Like estrogen goes up, testosterone goes down, we become more emotional. So you can control that in a man too. Now we can all agree also that when someone is very emotional, they're not able to make a logical decision. If you control the emotions, you control their decision, man or women. So then you can see the path that this takes about how you can control people by feminizing them.
Brilliant analysis. That was really great. Okay, we'll move away a little bit from the philosophical stuff and get into bodybuilding briefly. Sorry I take so much of your time. You're so generous with your time. I cannot thank you enough. And I hope my viewers really enjoy it and they can see what a generous person you are. So briefly, I wanted to ask you about bodybuilding related PEDs. Then we'll talk a little bit about cognitive enhancement and then a little bit about longevity. So in terms of bodybuilding PEDs, I wanted to ask you, in your extensive experience, you mentioned trenbolone a little while ago. I know before you used to be really concerned about using trenbolone, and probably rightfully so. I don't know how much you did use it, but I was curious, out of the androgens that you use, which have been your favorite, and for maybe briefly, for which reasons? Not in terms of cognition, just in terms of physical results.
Yeah, so D-bol, it's funny because D-bol is thought of like a beginner steroid, the first one that everybody does, but it's still one of my favorites, and it's still one of the favorites of a lot of high-end bodybuilders. They still use D-bol like they do in the beginning, and the dosage doesn't even change that much. It's pretty awesome, and it's super cheap. And yeah, like you mentioned in Thailand, like I've got the bottle of D-bol. It's so cheap, it's practically free. It's like buying vitamin C.
The pink ties.
Yeah, well, Blue Hearts is what seems to be widely available here. They're because they're little blue. They're tiny little blue heart, and they come in bottles of like 500 for like $20 if you go to the right place. It's a lifetime supply. And then as far as because PEDs includes a lot more than just steroids, but I'll just stay on sort of the androgen receptor.
Yeah. I'll ask you more about the other stuff.
Yeah. So like RAD140 is a SARM, but the performance increase I get from RAD140 is almost greater than anything other than methyltranolone, like methyltren. I mean, methyltren's an amazing performance-enhancing drug, but it doesn't really build muscle. It just gives you that aggression and neurological connection to the muscle to be able to lift harder and heavier for a very short period of time, but it's very highly toxic. So I like RAD140 because I've experienced no side effects from it, but it gets me that same type of mind-muscle connection and ability to contract the muscle harder. I like test suspension and I like trend suspension. Because they're fast acting, they're in and out, they hit hard. There's something very different about test suspension than actual testosterone. I don't know exactly why it's so much more powerful. Coach Trevor used to tell me this big 20-minute science explanation, but the bottom line is testosterone suspension is not just like testosterone. It's something more special.
Can I ask you briefly about, so you said some interesting things. One thing I wanted to, but before we get on that, you mentioned the methyltren affecting the neurological connection you have to your muscles, having an immediate performance increase. The interesting thing is on your interview with Mark Bell was saying steroids don't really make you stronger, which I found really bizarre to say because there is an immediate response when you take testosterone suspension. Or if you take, I have never tried trend suspension myself, but if you take halotestin or, trenbolone, there's an immediate result that's a strength increase, but it doesn't necessarily build up. So it doesn't mean that just because I got 10% stronger today, I'm going to get 40% stronger if I stay on it for a week. You might just keep that baseline strength stronger over a while, but it does have an immediate effect. That's certainly true. And that's through the adrenaline and norepinephrine. There's some certain changes in the neurological system. So that's certainly true. I also, like you, when I used to be lifting, I used to be very fond of test suspension. I loved it for a variety of reasons, including for mood enhancement, but especially as a pre-workout. In my opinion, the greatest pre-workout that if you take a little bit of Anadrol, I was an arm wrestler. If you take a little bit of an Anadrol and 100 milligrams of test suspension, you have a great time in the gym. You don't want to leave. You feel like a monster, and it's a great feeling. Now, about RAD 140, I don't know as much about the SARMs. I'm curious, do you know specifically how it is selective at its agonism at the androgen receptor? Like, does it not agonize particular receptors in the body? Do we know, or we just think it's a partial agonist? Because there's a difference between a selective modulator and a partial agonist. Partial agonist meaning that it just has less affinity. So, for example, the methyltren will have more of an affinity at the receptor, which is also why it's more toxic, by the way. Because actually, we could talk about that later. But so, do you know much about how it affects things differently? We hope it won't affect the prostate as much, but do we know exactly why? Have there been studies on prostate tissue?
I think you'll find studies that SARMs actually reduce prostate size. So they act almost like a SERM when it comes, like a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So I do believe they are binding to the prostate, but they're not having an androgenic effect. So, whether they're, the question is whether it's tissue selective, like whether it's binding only to muscle or whether it's binding everywhere, it's just having more of an anabolic instead of an androgenic effect. I think it's a little bit of both. I think when I first started talking about SARMs, I said it was more selective towards muscle tissue, as in it's going to bind to muscle and it's not going to bind to prostate. But I think because of the studies we've seen on actually lowering prostate size and sometimes even growing hair on the head, that means it's probably binding to the receptor so that DHT is not binding to the receptor, but that it's not having the same effect that DHT would have if it were bound to the receptor. So it's probably a little bit of both, but I can't say for certain.
Yeah, sometimes the modulators, I'm not as familiar with androgen receptors. Most of what I study are in the brain, but sometimes the modulators will affect basically how the agonist can bind. And it's a little complicated for every different receptor in the body. So it's really interesting to learn more about that. By the way, a brief note for yourself, because you're mentioning prostate size. I've recently discovered that, I don't know if you know this, it's not just that androgens increase prostate size. There's also, in people who are treatment resistant to androgen blocking therapies like finasteride or Proscar, they find that prolactin often increases the prostate size. So hyperprolactinemia will cause benign prostate hyperplasia. So it's really important to control prolactin. The problem is, of course, cabergoline is tied to a really horrible, cabergoline is no longer prescribed in the US for Parkinson's. And the reason why is because fibrotic development around the heart valves happens at high doses. Now, Parkinson's, they take higher doses than people do for hyperprolactinemia, but nonetheless, you must think that with the mTOR, the IGF-1, all of these different things that are going on in our bodies as bodybuilders, I'm not a bodybuilder, but for bodybuilders, what the fibrotic development around the valves of the heart with cabergoline would be really dangerous. Now, on the other hand, pramipexole does not have this effect. It's a different kind of agonist of the of blocker of the dopamine receptors. Is it an agonist? I don't know. Either one. It's a different kind. It falls into a different class. And pramipexole has caused heart failure, but reversible heart failure, and there's only a couple of cases. Whereas the cabergoline, very concerning. Just so you know.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful information. Something I'm struggling with right now is that my prolactin levels are almost zero. And there's an endocrinologist, a doctor that specializes in male hormones here in Thailand. And it's one of the many reasons I like being here in Thailand is I can network with people like this from all over the world. And he's saying that some side effects I have of maybe lower sex drive or various other things may be caused by actually having too low of prolactin. He wants to see my prolactin level come up. In order to do that, he wants to see my estrogen level come up to help bring the prolactin up. And so that's something that we're working through, which is too bad because I actually love taking cabergoline. I feel really good on it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I feel really good mentally on it. So it's unfortunate to hear about the potential heart issue. I have to research that more for sure.
Well, you'll certainly feel better mentally because I was incorrect earlier. It's a dopamine agonist. See, Parkinson's syndrome happens when people lose dopaminergic neurons. And what they do basically is they give them L-Dopa and various things to try to increase the dopamine in the brain to control their body movements. And cabergoline does that as well. So obviously you'll feel better on it. Question, is your estrogen low as well? Is that it? Because I keep my estrogen within. What's the ratio of testosterone to estrogen that you keep?
Oh, well, it's all over the place. I mean, like at any given time, it would be for whatever I'm trying to do with my hormone level at that time, I can manipulate it. So like right now, for example, I'd say my estrogen is probably right in the middle of normal range. That's where I'm trying to keep it right now.
Doctors tend to go by a ratio. The 10-to-1 ratio is the classic practice for maintaining mental health and stuff like that. If you keep your estrogen at a normal range for a normal person, but your testosterone is over 1,000, you will have some side effects. And keep in mind another thing, all right, Tony, not to give you advice, I love talking about this stuff. The other thing is that the estrogen, it's cardioprotective for sure. It is cardioprotective, preventative for atherosclerosis. It is neuroprotective. So there are studies I mentioned on my channel before. If you give androgens to an animal without an estrogen blocker, they will not experience neurological loss until you go to high doses. Medium dose, they'll be fine. But if you give them an aromatase inhibitor, they will get neurotoxic effects even at low doses of androgens. So they start losing brain cells, which don't come back except for in two parts of the brain, the hippocampus and so on. So estrogen is so protect. And the other thing is progesterone. In the bodybuilding, we have a bad idea of progesterone, but progesterone is actually really stimulating for sexual activity in men. In fact, progesterone creams are used to help people deal with erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, so I actually buy over-the-counter progesterone and estrogen so that I can experiment with those also. I actually just came across my progesterone.
Oh, fantastic.
This is over-the-counter in Thailand. Yeah, because my progesterone levels, I believe, are low as well. And that's when I started experimenting. Like they say that Anadrol is a really funny drug. They actually don't understand completely how it works. But they think that it acts on the progesterone receptors also. And there's certain parts of me that feel really good on Anadrol. And so I thought, okay, let's isolate whether it's the progesterone effects from it. So let's take progesterone and see. So that's one of the experiments. But one of my limiting factors is Gyno. And it's not bad. You can never see it. You'd never be able to see it. No, I haven't, and I need to. Because
the recommendation, there's a guy in California. He's, in my opinion, the best. He's in Orange County, Dr. Cruz. The best. Better than the guy in New York, in my opinion.
I'll write that down. And I'm in Thailand, too. It should be easy to find cheap here, but I just haven't looked into it yet.
Yeah,
so
you don't want one higher than the other.
yeah. I'm willing to pay extra to make sure it's really good. My limiting factor with my estrogen is that I don't want to exacerbate the gyno. And most people, if they approach steroids intelligently from the beginning, they're never going to have a gyno problem unless they had a youth gyno problem, not caused from steroids, because that's very common in puberty in America these days. But I did experiments to see what my threshold for getting gyno was, like intentionally to see what I could take to get gyno. What I didn't realize is when it came on so fast and so aggressive and then takes so long to get rid of, I thought I'd be able to mitigate it much faster. So that was the mistake. I don't regret it, but now I have to, like, my experimentation is a little bit limited by it, because although I want my estrogen up for health benefits, I don't want to exacerbate the gyno.
Yeah, and this is why I feel like anyone who wants to really use PEDs long term and be very muscular needs to get the gland removal, because the estrogen is so protective against all the harms that we're concerned about. All of them, So just to move on, I want to ask you briefly, do you feel that taking injectable IGF-1, of course you used to have an IGF-1 from enhanced chemicals, or maybe not you, but someone, there was an IGF-1 before. Did you feel that taking injectable IGF-1, either of the two variants, was as effective as taking insulin and human growth hormone? Because of course we know both of them have IGF-1 downstream to them. Did you find it as effective by itself, or was the insulin and the human growth hormone combined together more effective, the traditional route?
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm the only one saying this out there right now, and I haven't said it very much because I've been experimenting with it for a long time, and I want to make sure I have conclusive results before I say something that's going to completely change bodybuilding forever. If I had to choose between HGH and insulin or IGF, I choose HGH and insulin every time.
Me too.
But my first choice is to combine all three.
Absolutely.
I think the problem is the IGF by itself. There's something that happens in the cells that HGH does to prepare the muscle cell for the IGF that makes the IGF work much better. And then without insulin, you don't have as much nutrient delivery. So what's the point of creating an extremely anabolic muscle cell when you're not feeding it to grow? So it's the combination of those three things. And I've been experimenting with replacing the HGH in this model with MK677, which is the oral like this, right here, with MK677. And I found it to be really effective. And well, it's a long story of all the experiments I went through to figure this out. But lately I've been having athletes use MK677, injectable growth hormone, insulin, and IGF in short bursts, because that's the key. Running this all year is very unhealthy. Running it for 1 week and putting on 7 pounds of muscle in 1 week and then not being on it has no significant impact to the health. But the one that we can drop out is the HGH, because the MK677 is handling that pathway.
So there's a couple of things. So my understanding of the MK677 is that it causes a minor version of what people with pituitary tumors experience, which is a constant HGH pulse that is low. And by the way, that is actually more similar to what women experience. Women naturally have a lower not constant, but frequent pulses. Men have larger pulses, usually at night, usually in 2 bursts. And that's why people like Chad Nichols, they have their clients at night take a large dose right before bed and wake up in the middle of the night, which I don't approve. Waking up, I think, is a bad idea for many reasons. But the interesting thing about what you're saying, I totally agree with you. Turning on, it's not so much the IGF-1 and the insulin and the growth hormone, but turning on the mTOR, because they all turn on mTOR. So does eating protein. And that's why also you find people like Chad Nichols, their clients are eating ridiculous amounts of protein. And Milo Sarshev, 500 grams of protein. Of course, kidney toxic, but protein directly turns on mTOR. The problem is, if you have mTOR on all year long, you'll start to get cancers, especially skin cancers, for example. Because skin cancers are extremely, they respond very well to IGF-1 and these growth pathways. But other cancers do as well. So you find in our community a lot of different kinds of cancers. People don't like to talk about it, but people get cancers all the time. My opinion, if somebody had to be a bodybuilder and had to have that lifestyle, but didn't want to, number one, sometimes also your receptors downregulate from the IGF-1. But number two, to be healthy, personally, I see it being like 3 days a week or 2 days a week where you have that huge growth pulse. So you eat a lot of protein, and that'll last more than a day. That'll be in your body for about 2 days or so. And then the other days, what you do is you back off a little bit from that, and then you have fasting. See, what happens during the fast is great. It's one of the only ways in our lifetime that we can actively have our body go and kill cells with DNA damage. Now, where does the cancer come about? The cancer comes about when you have damage or breakages in your DNA, and then you have this growth pathway making the cells divide, hyperplasia. But you have the damage already in the DNA, so you're causing this, it becomes a tumorous growth. But if you fast frequently enough, this is the only way we know of right now to kill those damaged cells, which is cell apoptosis, but targeted cell apoptosis to the damaged cells. And another interesting thing is to fast, and then right after the fast to bring in that IGF-1 and insulin and all that, because what happens in a fast, or to take, what happens in a fast is your HGH goes up as well, so you get new baby stem cells that don't have any damage on them. You're also killing the damaged cells. Then if you take HGH while fasting, you might even get more of these cells that are fresh. And then right after, you start raising the IGF-1 with the protein and with everything else so that those cells can grow and mature through the process. In fact, if you're more interested in this, there's a researcher called Walter Longo at USC. He does a lot of research about fasting, how it changes cells in the bodies. He does a lot of research on fasting and cancer. And I really believe that this is the missing aspect in the bodybuilding lifestyle right now. If fasting can be brought in a regular basis with a proper program, a lot of harm will be averted. And also the great thing about fasting, right, is it targets subcutaneous fat. It targets visceral fat as opposed to subcutaneous fat. So you don't lose, when you go on a 5-day fast, which I've done many of them, you don't lose much fat underneath your skin. That fat is helpful because it's thermically active. Some of it's brown fat. It protects you from the cold. But the visceral fat is constantly, it has a lot of problems. It releases chemicals between your organs. It does a lot. My opinion is that the gut in bodybuilding, a lot of it is visceral fat as well as fatty liver and fatty pancreas. And the quickest cure to this, a 3-day fast or so, you get like a 50% reduction in the fatty liver. It's huge. So anyway.
I agree with everything that I know about what you said. I agree with, and there's some things I didn't know. The visceral fat, I noticed when we did the DEXA scan experiments, when we go higher on the insulin, that's when insulin seems to store the visceral fat. So in bodybuilding, sometimes you have these guts. Sometimes people are pretty lean. I think I would be interested to see the ones that have the guts, besides possibly inflammation or other things, whether they're actually carrying visceral fat due to the insulin usage, despite having no subcutaneous fat.
Yeah, absolutely.
For fasting, so my strategy is I have a diet that's all over the place, but there's a few principles that I abide by, which is I do give myself breaks from food because I am aware of the mTOR and AMPK pathways. So this morning, for example, I've been starving for the last 2 hours. I'm so freaking hungry, but I'm letting myself go through that. And then after the call, I'll eat. Now it's almost like an intermittent fast because it's not even a full day. It's basically a half day of fasting, which is not much. But it's also my theory that as a bodybuilder with a very fast metabolism, that a shorter period of time of fasting for me is like a longer period of time of fasting for someone with a very slow metabolism.
I really think that may be true. And also, I'd give you another reference. His name is Sachin Panda. He's over in San Diego, the leading researcher on circadian rhythms in the body. You probably carry the SR9009, SR9011. That's his stuff, their research. He has a book called The Circadian Code. It's very short. Don't need to read it. Basically, he's discovered that what you're doing right now, which is called they now call time-restricted feeding, which means eating within a certain window of the day, can be really helpful for a couple of reasons. For example, we become more insulin resistant later in the day. Melatonin, the hormone, makes you more insulin resistant automatically. So the later you eat in the day, the more insulin resistant you are. And it is insulin resistance, not just insulin, that causes the deposition of visceral fat. So the more you get used to taking, see what happens, I don't know if you know this, but type 2 diabetics, when they start taking insulin, they take low doses. Within about 30 years, their doses either triple or quadruple on every meal. And that is actual insulin resistance. You become resistant to the hormone. And it always coincides with deposition of fat on the liver, on the pancreas, and then this causes fatty liver disease and all that kind of stuff. But not to go too much into this, I want to hear more from you. I want to ask you just a couple of last questions. You mentioned shedding hair. What was it that was causing you to shed hair the most from the androgens or different drugs that you took? And you didn't shed much hair. I mean, you look almost the same as, a little bit in the back.
Yeah. So my hair's thin, but my hair has always been thin. Like it's a little more thin than before, but it's nothing like you could say, oh, I took steroids so my hair is thinner. No, it's at worst case, it's natural aging process or something like that. But I noticed that most of my hair loss came, and I'll relate this to the androgens in a minute, but I noticed, first of all, how do I know there's hair loss? Because when I wash my hair, if I grab my hair like this and pull out, either hair falls out or it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's such an easy test. Mm-hmm. And at periods of time in my life where I was under the most amount of psychological stress, maybe physical, everything, but especially psychological stress, that's when I noticed hair's falling out, irrespective of what androgens that I'm on. And Coach Trevor was the same thing. Like, he did a lot of steroids, never lost any hair, went through a divorce with his wife at a very young age. All his hair fell out within 2 months. Because he's a very romantic person, actually. And when he loves someone, it's love to the death. So when he went through that divorce, that was practically death for him. I could see how it would be so stressful that he would lose all of his hair, and that's what happened. And it never grew back since. And we've done experiments to grow his hair back since then, and we've learned a lot. But then for me, it was like when baby mama got pregnant and she basically said, now I've got you. That's when my hair started falling out a lot. And then also as a lawyer, just stressing myself, working 18 hours a day, running myself into the ground, not enough rest, I was noticing hair coming out. And so that's in my early 30s, late 20s and early 30s that I was sort of, but my hair was already thin before that. Okay, so here's how the androgens affected it. I never lost a lot of hair from Winstrol, Masterone, Proviron. These are all the DHT-based steroids that most people lose hair from. Mm-hmm. But when I used them and I was under psychological stress, I lost hair. So, for example, Trenbolone supposedly can make you lose a little bit of hair by itself, but it's not the Trenbolone itself, it's the stress that Trenbolone causes me, because I become a very stressful person on Trenbolone, and I believe it is the anxiety that causes the hair loss. For me, now that's not for everybody. Some people are very sensitive to DHT compounds, and they take any one of those mentioned compounds and they're going to lose hair.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. I had the same experience with Trenbolone myself. Trenbolone obviously causes the most of the commonly used steroids, the most norepinephrine and epinephrine, as we call the hypothalamus pituitary axis or adrenal axis, the HPA axis, just gets overworked. And when you're on Trenbolone, it's like even your nerves, you feel you can't sleep well. And that's when I noticed the same thing happening. And because there's DNA damage going on when you have that.
So you mentioned epinephrine, norepinephrine. So this is adrenaline, noradrenaline. Say adrenaline, right? Makes us like that. So I believe that the reason why it's the anxiety causing me more hair loss, not the DHT, is because I don't have the genetic predisposition for hair loss from DHT, but what affects all of us is blood flow to the scalp. And the pathway that minoxidil works on, for example, Rogaine, is to bring blood flow to the scalp. And some of the people that I've seen that have the best hair, every morning they do this, where they hang upside down, but not hang, but they put their head upside down and they massage their scalp, and they have fantastic hair. And so I think what's happening is adrenaline pulls blood flow away from things like your scalp. And so I think we're depriving certain parts of our body, including our scalp, of blood flow because we're in a stress response because of the stress hormones that are triggered by the possible androgens. Or the androgens also change our mindset so that we just become more easily triggered to have a stress response, Absolutely. Even if they aren't directly causing the stress response.
Well, this is absolutely proven, by the way. This has been shown in studies that androgens cause people to have a more, actually the amygdala becomes way more overactive, and the amygdala is the fight or flight primal part of the brain. It's a small part of the brain. It disconnects from other parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, on long-term androgen use. And this causes an overactivation of that HPA axis that I was mentioning as well. I know more about hair going white because I'm going gray more. And I think you experience the same thing. Now, that is DNA damage. That's actually DNA damage at the hair follicle root, which is why you'll find when you get stressed for periods of time, your hair will suddenly, you'll notice a few more strands. And that is literally the hair follicle having DNA damage and losing its function, which means you're also getting DNA damage everywhere else in your body. It's not just the hair. And that is the actual kind of damage that with IGF-1 and mTOR could lead to problems later on. Now, moving on from bodybuilding briefly, I wanted to ask you, so we're all getting older, and the benefits or the fun that comes along with having muscle and being whether it's for powerlifting or for aesthetic reasons, it declines a little bit as we get older, because we see that, and this is why a lot of athletes get a little bit depressed as they get older, because we see that we can't necessarily get to where we could have before. It slowly declines. Have you started to change your focus away from bodybuilding and aesthetics, but maintaining your interest in changing your biological function? And particularly, I want to ask you about two subjects, which is cognitive enhancement, which I know you're interested in, and longevity, which I don't know if you're interested in.
So yeah, is my focus going to shift as I age? In the beginning, when I didn't realize that I would even have the potential to get as huge as I could, because I still believed in the fake natty thing. Even though I was studying all the chemistry, the fake natty thing still had me under its influence. I figured I could just keep pushing my body to its limit my whole life and just keep improving. I didn't realize the plateau was going to happen so low. I didn't realize, I thought that the natural plateau was up here, not down here. So, but then once I
lifts usually.
Once I started getting good at the chemistry and realizing how much muscle I could put on and have, because now the sky's the limit. I could become a mass monster as big as anybody else now, knowing the chemistry. I don't want to do that now because I can't, even if I put on 10 pounds right now, then I can't sleep. I can't breathe. I can't move around. I'm tired going upstairs. And it's not every big muscular guy experiences this, but ones with smaller frames like me and that are not meant, genetically meant to be smaller bones, smaller people, having that extra muscle is just so unnatural. So I want to be bigger than what's natural. I want to be this size for a while longer. I wish I would have started chemistry earlier, when it would have been healthier for me to be really big and just done that for once in my life and pushed the limit and been extremely uncomfortable when it wouldn't tax my health so much. But now the wonderful thing about the chemistry is it's a shortcut to be able to have an awesome physique without putting that much effort in. And once I knew the chemistry was there to be as big as I wanted to be, then yes, it was like, okay, well, I definitely am not going to keep going on this path of getting bigger. I'll figure out how to keep doing it smarter and healthier. And that was the initial intent when I first started steroids too. It was like, okay, I'm going to do a steroid cycle and then I'm just going to cruise on SARMs and just like make slow progress. I didn't realize how powerful SARMs were. I thought SARMs at the time were just going to maintain the muscle. I didn't realize you could actually like grow. I figured like steroids will bring you here, but if you stop steroids, you'll come back down here. But if I can steroids to get here and just keep the SARMs going there, then that's the perfect balance of health, longevity, and also looking and feeling awesome. So I did always intend to shift to health and longevity. It was also a passion of mine at a young age because I wanted to live forever and death scared me. And to be honest, it was a fear of death that caused me to become interested in longevity. But then I started realizing, like, I was studying so much and reading so much research about longevity and the telomeres and all these things that I studied so long ago, I can't even remember all of it. But then I realized, like, how do people really die? Like, people don't usually die of just old age. They, something hits them along the way: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, accidents, murder, domestic violence, whatever. So it's like, okay, if we say, okay, I'm most likely to die of heart disease, then let's address that and not worry about the stuff down here because that's what's going to kill me. And then once I've figured that out, then let's say, okay, what's the next most likely thing to kill me? And what I find is the most likely thing to kill me, the root foundation of everything is stress, because that makes all of the possible ways I could die more likely. So that's what I've been trying to get to as my longevity approach now, is more along the lines of the stress and the mental side of things. And
that goes to the cognitive enhancement portion that we were talking about.
That's how it all fits together. Yeah.
And I actually really think similarly. I know you take a beta blocker sometimes. I've been doing that for a couple of years now for similar reasons, to try to disrupt this HPA axis because it's really dangerous. Briefly, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had your genetics tested?
Yes.
Have you had them analyzed? I mean, do you know what ApoE variant you are, your CTP gene for cardiovascular disease? Do you know the details? Because
I have it all in a report. Yeah.
Oh, you do? So do you know your FOXO3? Do you know what longevity genes you have, or not really?
I mean, I could pull it up. I won't take time to the podcast
No,
to pull it. Maybe if you want to look at my genetic report and we can publicly talk about my genetic report, I'd be willing to do that in the future. Yeah,
absolutely. I'd love to just give you a couple of tips for free because there's a couple of things, if you learn about them, you can really know how dangerous your cardiovascular. I mean, let's talk about this. I was going to ask you later, what biomarkers do you look at to manage your health? I mean, in terms of blood tests, biomarkers.
Yeah, so I usually get just the whole general steroid, men's health, longevity panel, like the normal panel from, let's say, like a hospital. And in the US, I use the private MD labs, for example, and I'll order that online, and I'll just order the $350 package, basically like the full panel. When I'm in other countries, then I'll just test. It's for what I'll get full tests also, but then I'll test whatever I'm doing for a specific experiment. So I don't usually just test how I'm doing at any one time. It's usually like, okay, I'm messing with my hormone levels, so I'm going to test all the hormones and everything downstream from that to see how it's impacting me. Because I've done so many tests about my general health that all just come back the same every time. It's just kind of repetitive, not much change.
Do you mind mentioning like what your LDL cholesterol is generally on average?
Yeah, LDL is bad.
Well, which number though? What area? What region? Is it like 150? Is it 70? Is it?
I don't watch LDL too much.
Hard to remember.
I watch HDL very closely because that's one I was most fascinated in, because I've always been low.
Well, the interesting thing about HDL is HDL cholesterol is not very informative because it's not the HDL particle count. Sure, the HDL cholesterol compared to the LDL cholesterol as a ratio is informative, but you really want to, if you in the future, by the way, if you do an HDL particle test, not a HDL cholesterol test, that will be really informative because that's involved in reverse cholesterol transport. But people in bodybuilding, they often don't realize how low LDL has to be to avoid atherosclerosis. Anything above a level of 60 on LDL cholesterol, from research we know, is you're developing plaque. And so most bodybuilders I know that think they have good LDL cholesterol, they have about 150 to 170, and they're developing plaque rapidly. And so, all the autopsies we know of bodybuilders have had severe atherosclerosis. And it's not necessarily because...
Yeah, I've got one of my lab reports up here that says my LDL was 163, which the normal range is less than 100, so very elevated. Yeah.
Well, the normal range is just based on averages. It doesn't mean anything about the health effects. Like anything above 70, you should be worried about atherosclerotic plaque development. Now, that doesn't mean that you would die from the plaque development. Some people never get heart attacks. They have severe atherosclerosis. But it just means you're developing that. So at anything above 150 or so, you have it. But it's not too high, and there's some medications you can take that could not harm your bodybuilding too much, but could reduce that LDL cholesterol. Like there's one called the ezetimibe, very interesting medication because it just prevents your absorption of dietary cholesterol. And it prevents the liver from being able to take cholesterol out of the bile. And it doesn't have many other side effects. So it's pretty interesting. There's some, little tricks there. Another thing I want to ask you, do you do scans, like ultrasounds of your kidneys or fMRI scans of your liver and heart?
Yeah, I've had the ultrasound done of my heart, liver, and kidneys. Yeah.
You haven't done an fMRI of your heart, though?
What's fMRI stand for?
fMRI is when you go in that machine and you have to keep breathing weirdly. It takes hours, and it's the ultrasound is just a machine they put on.
I did have I think it was an MRI, but it was for calcium scoring.
Oh, that's a CT scan.
Okay, so
that's,
the CT
by the way,
scan,
very dangerous. That's very dangerous. Really high levels of radiation can cause cancer for sure. Very dangerous. Now, the thing about the CT scan, by the way, it's a little confusing because in bodybuilding, they always tell you, hey, some people say like, oh, I have a 0 calcium score. This is great for me. What do you have? And so people go and get the CT scan, not realizing the CT scan is one of the strongest radiation scans that exist. And the problem is calcium only builds up in the arterial structure to actually, it's a healing process for the plaque. And it happens about a decade later. So it's very unlikely at your age that you would have much calcium. Did you have much?
No.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't. This was a waste. You want to only check that really after 60 or so. What you want to check is the fMRI just to make sure there's no blockages in the heart. I did one here at Cedar Sinai. Like I have a good guy here if you want to go to LA to get it. You need to have a very good technician to study the actual results because the doctor doesn't know much. It's the technician that's looking at the machine. It's a very expensive machine. To see how the blood flow is going around in your heart to make sure that it doesn't seem there's any major blockages. And if there are any, they'll put a stent to force that artery open so you don't get the heart attack.
So the last heart scan I had was the ultrasound, and the technician spent a really long time because I said, look, I'm doing this for a documentary for Enhanced 2. It didn't end up in the documentary, but I did a very thorough analysis for the documentary in case it wanted to be included. And so he was really thorough with it, and my heart came back perfect in every way. Like the injection fraction, the beat, I don't remember all the different factors, but it was like perfect down the whole list.
You weren't in the machine though. You were just, he had like okay, got it. And your kidneys are doing well, hopefully?
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. So there was no heart enlargement, no left ventricular hypertrophy, none of that. Yeah. And then liver and kidneys, ultrasound, everything was flawless. The reason why the doctor ordered the ultrasound is because my liver values are always elevated. I mean,
your alpha fetoprotein or just your ALT, AST? The alpha fetoprotein is what's used to measure the development of liver cancer, which can be really random sometimes. You might not have elevated ALT, AST.
My AST and ALT is always elevated, and then my gamma GT is normal. So it's just AST, ALT, which can be a result of working out and a number of different things that don't necessarily mean there's any permanent damage happening. It's just an enzyme response.
So in about 30% of people that have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is very common in the US, they do not even have elevated ALT or AST. So it's almost a given that if you have an elevated ALT, AST, you have fatty liver disease, and you would do great with a fast. The reason why, when the ALT and AST are elevated, that means you have inflammation at the liver. Especially if your C-reactive protein is also elevated. You're having inflammation there. When the liver has the inflammation, it starts to store more fat on the liver when it does de novo lipogenesis, which means the creation of fat. Especially if you're eating like a fructose diet or eating sugars and carbs and stuff like that. And if you can get rid of the fat from there, your midsection will get smaller and your general body inflammation will get better and your insulin sensitivity will get better too. So it could be really helpful. Now, last thing I want to talk about, I took too long, but just briefly, I wanted to ask you about cognitive enhancement. I've heard of you before saying in your interviews that you microdose mushrooms. Being in Northern Californian, that seems very common in that kind of area. People microdose psilocybin and microdose LSD. I think you've done both. You also use the opiate kratom as well, sometimes, I think, for mood enhancement, which is interesting. Can you tell our audience more about that?
Yeah, so starting with the mushrooms, my first mushroom experience was in Thailand, and it was a megadose. I mean, now I know the dosage is between 1 and 5 grams, maybe, and like a microdose, maybe I'm just throwing out a wild number, like 200 milligrams or something like that. But I probably took like 20 grams, 30 grams.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so it was a funny situation. It was not very organized, and I had what most people like call an ayahuasca experience or some much more intense psychedelic experience than most people would ever get from mushrooms. And in fact, one of the other people that had used psychedelics before was like, this isn't mushrooms. This is DMT. This is, but this isn't mushrooms, whatever this is. So it was some good mushrooms and it was way too much. And that's what, I was with friends and I was with someone guiding us. The problem is the guy guiding us, one of the guys did a lot of marijuana on top of it to amplify it. One of them kind of went crazy and went in the street and started yelling at cars. So the guy had to go manage him, which left us to ourselves to figure this thing out. And that's where it got crazy. So that was my first experience. After that, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to do this again. This is like way beyond, like, I'm not ready to travel to other dimensions type thing. Like, let me just get my feet planted on planet Earth here a little bit more first. But then it definitely caused the ego death. And it caused me, the best example I can give is when I went to flip on a light switch, I wasn't sure. I couldn't be certain whether flipping that switch was actually going to turn the light on. I had to find out for myself. So it completely got rid of all of my judgments, what I think is going to happen and what I think about the world around me. And it blew my mind. And I did want to experience that. I wanted to then set that aside and experience that again more when I'm in the next chapter of my life. So use it as a transition. So when I'm done with one chapter, now it's time to psychedelic reset to prepare myself for the next chapter in life, which I think is a great use for it, right? Completely opposite of what most people are using things recreationally for. Like, this is purely life enhancement, mind enhancement.
Just annotate Tony's comment, a hero's dose. It's literally called a hero's dose of psilocybin mushrooms of the golden teacher is 5 grams or 4 grams. He's talking about taking 4 times more than that, which would cause a lot of people to become permanently schizophrenic, to be honest with you. So he really survived that, and that's an excellent.
Or maybe I am schizophrenic now.
No, I doubt
that. It's about the government and all that.
But do you ever microdose them for the benefit of cognition? Because I noticed that at a 1 to 300, depending on the mushroom. I like to use very rare strains of mushrooms that are land grown, very hard to get in the U.S., and they're more powerful than the golden teacher. And with those, sometimes you can just take 50 milligrams or 100. Right.
So the most powerful mushrooms, milligram per milligram, I experienced. I haven't experienced very many. Was the albino? No. B+. They're called B+. And they were picked at a very young age, which makes them very potent, so I'm told. And a very small amount of that goes a really long way. And it's a really good, it's a euphoric feeling, but it's a very focused feeling. And I tried using it under many different situations. Like, I used it before the gym. Bad idea. Doesn't help with the gym. Makes me like, it makes me feel connected to everything, and it makes me able to focus, but it also makes me hyper aware of my surroundings. Like, it's like at the gym, I want to be in output mode. I want my adrenaline high. I want to put energy out. I don't want to take any energy in. This is all about me putting energy out. And the mushrooms is like all about putting energy in. And so better to be at home, like studying. Okay, so a very low dosage of mushrooms, I find I can get very focused and deep into a topic without hitting any barriers. I don't hit walls. I just keep going deeper and deeper down a rabbit hole until I make an amazing discovery. Right? Great for, like, here's the amazing thing. Let's say if I want to invent something, I start with the creativity of using something like a marijuana to open my mind to all the possibilities. And then I use something like the mushrooms to now focus and go really deep into it. Now, so I guess...
No, sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, I guess that's the way to best describe it. Like so Adderall works really good for me because I have
exactly what I was about to ask you. Exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
So the mushrooms actually act a lot like the Adderall as far as my ability to focus and go deep. And I have a lot of, my brain is very overactive. So if you take someone like me or like you, it sounds like, and you take all this energy that's getting spread out all over and you focus it like a laser beam, you already have superhuman intelligence. You just weren't focusing it. So these things help you focus it.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting what Tony mentions. We've already mentioned on the channel before. I've noted that low-dose mushrooms, even though the psilocybin mushrooms seem to be mostly active at the serotonin receptors, by the way, which I'm writing like a sort of a book on the subject, have a cognitive enhancing element. They actually, with attention, with memory, with learning. And for some reason at low doses, they have an effect that's almost cholinergic. It feels like you took one of those cholinergic drugs like a racetam or those kind of things. And I'm also a fan of amphetamines. Nowadays, they get a very bad rap because of abusers of amphetamines who take grams, the smoke that amphetamine and stuff like that. But amphetamines at low doses can be, I think, really productive and add so much value to people's lives, especially for people that may have anxiety like you and I, or not anxiety, but that kind of tenseness combined with the beta blocker. Especially if you're concerned about your heart rate going a bit higher, combined with the beta blocker. And then I have a lot of combinations that I do. Now, the final question I want to ask you, moving on with Enhanced Athlete in the future, you guys have been sort of pioneering in coming up with finding obscure chemicals that not many other people know about and putting them to market. Now, the thing is, I've noticed personally, because my main subject of interest is cognitive enhancement. And when I talk about cognitive enhancement, I mean mood enhancement, as well as memory and learning and stuff like that. But a lot of it is mood enhancement without the negatives that come with receptor downregulation, like at the dopamine receptor or other things like that. So what I wanted to ask you, going through my research, writing my book, I come across tons of research chemicals which are very interesting, which are done in labs only, and they've never been produced. I like very specific agonists of certain receptors. So for example, nicotine is actually neuroprotective. Like people who smoke tend not to get Parkinson's. It protects the dopaminergic neurons, which is why some people will take nicotine gum. It's also cognitive enhancing. But the nicotine, it agonizes all of the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. There are also muscarinic cholinergic receptors, which are different, which are almost impossible to agonize with many things. Now, there are certain research chemicals I've been coming across that agonize particular nicotinic receptors that are particularly neuroprotective. So you could have a better effect than just taking nicotine, which does all of them and specifies about 2 of them more than the rest. To enhance, so a combination of different agonists together. And I was wondering, somebody more entrepreneurial and commercially driven like yourself should take advantage of these kind of opportunities, because these nootropics on the market are ridiculous. Let me tell you, they are nothing. If you go into the research, you realize, what are you guys even doing? You're combining herbal products that don't really do much together. You're not inhibiting transporters, because a lot of what we want to do is keep a neurotransmitter in the brain by inhibiting the transporter instead of directly agonizing, because when you agonize, you get receptor downregulation. So not to talk too much, but have you ever thought about doing more of that?
Yeah, here's the problem though. So Coach Trevor and I have it's not invented. I guess like the general population would think like we're inventing a compound. Nobody's inventing anything. It's already all out there. You're just trying to either synthesize something or take something and change it into another form. And we did a lot of stuff with a lot of weird chemistry and made a lot of discoveries. But you're talking about the commercial side of it. The problem is, and this is, when we find a really good drug, I'm always thinking to myself, do I keep this for myself and do I keep this a secret? And then I get to have this forever because it'll never get taken away from me because the government doesn't know what it is. Or do I publicize it and everybody's going to have access to it, which is great, because then it's going to open up their minds to see what's possible with chemistry, because people just don't even realize that the cure to every possible disease already exists out there. It's just all hidden from us. And now you sound like you've discovered that there are all these chemicals. And when I first started going to China to source drugs, and I would go to these expos, they would have these lists like this long of chemicals that they produce. And I would research these and I'd be like, wait a second, where are all of these chemicals in Western civilization? They don't exist. Why? For Viagra replacement, I'm just talking super general so people understand the concept. I know you're talking about nootropics, but just Viagra, there's 75 other compounds that do exactly what Viagra does, and most of them are better than Viagra. Why are we using Viagra? Oh, because Pfizer got a patent on it, and they developed a business model around it. And the way that the FDA works is they actually spend most of their influence preventing competitors from competing with the established pharmaceutical industry. It's not a positive thing, it's a negative thing to limit our access to chemistry. And then you've got the media trying to brainwash people that as soon as something becomes popular and effective, that then it's bad and they need to get rid of it. And you've got lawmakers who are being paid and lobbyists who are writing laws to make it all illegal and inaccessible. So you are an underground researcher of nootropics. I've gone down this pathway. I've discovered incredible compounds, but if I publicly talk about them, they will get taken away from us. And so that's the struggle I always have.
This is exactly what and you're probably not driven by the commercial interest either. So you're like, if I would be doing it to help people. I'm not going to make that much out of it anyway. But I'm going to ruin it for myself. And this is my situation as well. I'm in contact with Chinese people trying to make my own little formulations at high cost to myself, because actually they don't produce the ones that I'm looking for. They're very new things. But I don't want to talk about it publicly because, I don't want it to be banned or I don't want something to happen to me, you know.
So my approach is to try to change people's perspective about enhancing themselves with chemistry and to distrust the pharmaceutical, mainstream supplement industry, and the government. And if they understand those two things, then they will also arrive at the same conclusion. So without giving up a specific chemical name or drawing attention to it by the government, if I can open up their minds, everyone will eventually arrive to the same destination we're trying to get them to, in a way that makes me less of a target, that takes away less of the chemistry from us. But unfortunately, the sheep of Western civilization and the world, it's just so hard for them to unplug from the mainstream media. And the mainstream media is so advanced at the psychology of mind control that even if you convince them to get out of the matrix, as soon as they plug back in, they can't get back out. So I'm constantly struggling with how do we inspire people and educate people in a way that will have them become curious about these compounds to where they are the ones asking for the information instead of us having to push the information on them. And I do use I pick certain compounds to discuss publicly, and then other compounds I don't. I will say this one thing though, because there's one nootropic drug that I took that blows everything else out of the water. And I don't know what it is. This is the tragic part. But I took this one drug and it gave me mental superpowers like nothing I've ever experienced we're talking maybe like Adderall times 10 plus, a stack of all other nootropics at the same time. And Coach Trevor made this for me in our underground laboratory. And, it was weird because he wouldn't tell me what it is. And then finally digging, he's like, Tony, I'm not sure exactly what it is that I made you, but it is an amphetamine base. It's not methamphetamine. It's not Adderall. It's not this. It's not that. But I did these 4 chemical reactions. And so I took it along this path. And my chemistry knowledge tells me it's going to equal this. But I'm not even sure if that's exactly what it equals. And I actually had him make a second version. And I gave it to some friends. And they had the same experience. Well, what happened was that it lasted about 12 hours. And I don't like that. I like short half-lives because I believe that, you can manipulate the brain chemistry for a short period of time with no side effects. But if you do it, like methamphetamine is a perfect example. It's actually, it would be an amazing drug if it lasted just 4 hours, but because it lasts so long, it causes a lot of damage. It's just like activating mTOR for a really long period of time. You need to give yourself a break. You don't want to be on the same pathway for too long. So I wanted a shorter half-life.
Yeah, I think all drugs should be as specific in their agonism as they can be, and not be just agonizing everything, and as not very short, but like depending on the use, like 3 or 4 hours, something like that. The problem with the shorter half-life, just to mention briefly, is the shorter the half-life, the more habitual the experience can become, because that's how people get habituated to taking drugs, because I can't think of a drug right now. Cocaine, for example. Cocaine has a very short half-life, so you keep doing it, and that's what gets you habituated to it. But anyway, Tony, I'm so aware of your time. This is actually the longest podcast I've done. Usually I do an hour and a half, and I say 40 minutes, but it goes a bit longer. I really appreciate your time, Tony. I'm sure all the viewers and listeners will also. I wanted to say that I personally thank you for what you've done for our community. And I hope that more people will, instead of attacking you, which is irresponsible and all over I don't even know what they're thinking, appreciate the self-sacrifice that you have done, because you haven't gained that much out of this personally. What you have done instead is given us all something to think about, a way to imagine how one can live and how the world can be. All right. Thank you so much, Tony.